"25 years, eh? That's how long the PlayStation's been around, in case you missed loads of people talking about it on Twitter last week. The grey box from the publishers of such classic games as Last Action Hero and Three Ninjas Kick Back for the Mega Drive hit the shelves in Japan on December 3rd, 1994. A lot of people didn't think it would catch on, but well, it did. Now, there's lots of classic titles I could focus on to celebrate the PSX's 25th anniversary, but I've gone in a more weird direction, as you might expect. The recreation of arcade games that were already classics on the PS1. Around the late 90s or so, there was kind of a mini fad for this, to take some of the best known arcade games from the golden age, the early 80s, late 70s, and remake them in 3D so that a whole new generation could enjoy them. One particular studio was very fond of this. When Hasbro owned Atari Interactive between 1998 and 2000, they thought that the best thing to do would be to remake an absolute ton of the legendary company's old IPs. So needless to say, we'll be seeing a lot of their efforts. But they weren't the only ones. A couple of other companies certainly chucked a few out there too. Some of these games aren't particularly good, but there are definitely a few gems here. We've got 11 titles, which doesn't cover all of the PS1 3D retro remakes, but it hits most of them. So, well, what are we waiting for? We should just get on with it. The first Atari classic to be remade by Hasbro, perhaps surprisingly enough, was Centipede. You might have thought they'd have hit a couple of the more famous ones first, but it's not like this one is obscure. It's the one where you try and blast the big old multi-part creature to oblivion, one segment at a time. Kinda like a variation on Space Invaders, really, which naturally we're also going to be seeing later on. What we're mainly going to be looking for with these 3D titles is whether they still manage to retain the general appeal that the original title had, while also seeing what they add, if anything. And in these regards, Centipede's not a bad one to start with, as it pretty much falls right into the middle. First off, one of the main things that this, and indeed most of these games add, is a plot. Someone had the bright idea that these games, famed for their absolute no-frills, no-bullshit instant pick-up and play appeal, needed lots of animated movies and other 3D trappings to explain why there's these giant centipedes roaming the land that you have to blow up. To be fair, this one isn't the most egregious example. The actual game itself takes place in various levels where there's multiple beasts to clear out. The biggest change is that you're no longer limited to the bottom area of the screen and can instead move around wherever you like, getting as close to the aliens as you dare. You get a few power-ups to help you along, the Centipede's various colleagues are also around to spoil your day, and you have the option to switch camera between a more traditional top-down affair and a third-person view that might be better for aiming the odd shot. You can strafe, you can turn, you can do a lot of the regular shooty things. Centipede in 3D is actually simple enough to get to grips with. The general concept translates well, and the result is a perfectly okay 3D shooter. It's not the most fun to play, mind you. I find the controls of old Wally's ship to be a little too sensitive, and they can be quite frustrating when you have to make tighter manoeuvres, especially when you go on a bridge. On the whole, there's enough fun for about 15 minutes or so, but it doesn't make me want to play much more than that. Oh, and as with a lot of these Atari titles, you get a version of the original game to go along with it, just in case you wanted the deal sealed. So, yeah. Centipede sets the standard for most of what we'll be seeing in this vid, and that standard is, mediocrity. As mediocre as an evening in watching Midsummer Murders. Okay, you want something a bit more famous than Centipede? Well, Hasbro Atari have got nothing else but the first game to be in any way popular at all. Here's Pong, the Next Level, a new version of the eternal battle between two bats that obviously doesn't need an introduction. This is definitely one of the more curious ones. Pong is so straightforward and simple that there's clearly a lot that can be done with the concept. Indeed, a lot has been done with the concept. But this one manages to do it whilst also retaining the traditional two bats and the ball, which is quite interesting. And you know what? I actually like this one. The classic style is pretty much retained. You control the bat with up and down, and aside from a few power-ups that you can trigger, that's pretty much it. The difference here is the levels. Aside from there being ones that cover the classic variations such as football or hockey pong where you control two bats at once, there's lots of little gimmicks in the levels, whether it's penguins that crap out multiple balls if they're hit, or trigger and rolling logs that will seriously give the opponent, or you, some trouble with the ball as it keeps bouncing back at you. No matter what the variation is, if you get the score up to 10, you win. It's simple as that really. I generally enjoy simple games like this, and as a result, this is cool to me. It's not exactly shining here in single player mode, but if you've got a couple of mates then this will definitely provide some nice and totally casual action. A jolly good way of playing a game that was already 25 years old at the time this 3D take was released. Okay, here's one that is not particularly hot. Frogger from 1997 keeps us in the land of Hasbro, although this came before the Atari acquisition. This is of course a game originally by Konami. One that I have always been terrible at. No matter what I do, these poor frogs always get utterly squished, or weirdly utterly drowned, at my hands. This 3D take keeps all of that intact, with a few more variations to offer. Whether you're avoiding trucks or trying to time platforms, you've still got to rescue the other frogs one by one in a strict time limit. I would say that this one is kind of a love-hate affair. Some people do seem to really enjoy this one, whereas I can't say that I do. I can take the incredibly blocky graphics, this is after all a PlayStation 1 we're talking about, and such things do come with the territory, but the controls are just very annoying to me. The movement of my frog always seems to be quite delayed, which is never good in a game that's whole thing is being incredibly tight on timing. Some of the variations here just seem stupid, like Honeybee Hollow, where bees just seem to appear at random and you die because you can't outrun them. The difficulty level here is pretty damned hard, but the controls and annoying nature of the levels don't mean that it's hard in a good way, it just means that it's not much more than a whole load of bullshit to deal with. And yet, this was one of the more popular of the 3D remakes, despite not being received well at all. Popular enough to get a sequel, which I haven't played, but apparently that tones the bullshit and difficulty level down somewhat. On the whole, however, Frogger isn't exactly one of my favourite arcades to begin with, and this 3D version of it, well, it can go do one. Here is something better from Konami then. I kind of debated including International Track and Field. It's a rather major title and it'd probably be best described as a fully fledged sequel to the original, but then it does kind of retain the exact same game style and controls as the original, so in the end, I think it counts. Anywho, this is a game where loads of 3D polygons fashioned into the frame of a pro athlete do things like run 100 metres in 10 seconds, throw javelins 80 metres, and generally do lots of other things you and I likely will never be able to do, ever. Much like the original Track and Field from 1984, honestly. I reckon that this game's quite a lot of fun, much like most of the other Konami sports titles from this time. Sure, there's not much to it other than bashing buttons or timing a jump and making sure you get the angle right, but such utterly simple things do provide a bit of a workout and some sort of satisfaction when you actually manage to get it right, especially when you're competing with other people, which is the whole point of this thing. And seeing as you could throw 3 other players into the mix this time around, there was plenty more opportunities with this game to beat your mates, slap the controllers out of their hands, and generally start a good old fashioned fight. There's lots of good memories associated with this one. Aside from all that, the presentation's damn great, higher than most of the other titles we'll be featuring. There's plenty of different events to get working on, and naturally there's records to break and hold onto your memory card forever. There's also much fun to be had with the quite a considerable amount of Easter eggs, as well as using a cheat code to automatically go full power and throw that javelin straight out of the frickin' stadium. In short, International Track and Field is a bloody brilliant update of a classic, and one of the best games in this whole video. No surprises there really. So, it's time once again for Atari Land. This time we're going with a, well, I suppose you could call it a 3D take on Asteroids. It's the very classic indeed vector-based blaster where you, the ship, must blow endless rocks to smithereens, occasionally whilst being harried by UFOs and the like. It's simple, it's fun, it's kinda hard to screw up in all honesty. And this 3D effort at Asteroids kind of proves that by being not bad at all. I wasn't sure quite what to expect from this one. A fully 3D version of Asteroids? We've sort of seen that before if anyone remembers playing Darkside for the 32X, which if you have played it at all, you'll know is kind of terrible. This isn't that. It's pretty much just Asteroids with souped up graphics, a few more power-ups, and a few more controls such as flipping and a shield, meaning it's more like Super Stardust, a more advanced take on the original concept. Of all Atari's 3D remakes, this is the one that probably changes the least things about the original, with the exception of one other much worse effort that we're going to see later, but this still happily retains the intense gameplay of the original, with its flying around, desperation stabs at a shield, or going into hyperspace. Asteroids is just plenty of fun, no matter how you slice it. You may not necessarily want to spend all that much money on what is basically just a jacked up version of a 40-year-old game, but it won't exactly annoy you all that much. Still, it has to be said that we might want some things with a bit more ambition. Namco certainly had some pretty major plans for the almighty Pac-Man in the brave new 3D world. Hell, he even got a proper 3D platformer in the shape of Pac-Man World, especially for his 20th anniversary. That game does have some fans actually, but it doesn't really count for this video. It's far too different from the original concept. However, Namco did have a little bit of a play with the regular old style for another game, this time starring the Pac Daddy's bowed up female equivalent. Here's Ms. Pac-Man Maze Madness, released in 2000. Believe it or not, although there are loads of regular Pac-Man games between his original title and the beginning of the new millennium, this was actually the first game starring Miss Pac-Man in 19 years. And what do Namco bring us for the Mrs.'s long-awaited return? Well, we have a game that uses the same engine as Pac-Man World does, and thus looks pretty sharp and snazzy for the PS1, as cute and wacka 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 as you would expect, but stays much truer to the original style. The levels are mazes, complete with dots, ghosts, power pills and all of that. But they're also much bigger, with lots of other things to use. Sprints, TNT, other assorted stuff that adds a little bit more of a puzzle element, lots more variation. And the end result, I can happily say, is a really good game. I had a lot of fun with this one, and I'm not even a big Pac-Man fan. This definitely feels like everything these 3D attempts at old games should be. Not only does it still nail the original concept and what was good about that, but it adds a whole lot more to the table that makes it feel fresh. It has to be said that Namco have been pretty good at doing that with Pac-Man over the years, and this title is no exception. If you're big on Pac-Man and Ms. Pac-Man and you've not played this, then it's very highly recommended indeed. Up next, we have what might just be the weirdest of all of these 3D arcade remakes, and it's another one from the Hasbro Atari pile. It's Breakout, released in 2000. A new version of the ultra-simple 1976 game where you've got a bat, there's a ball, and you break blocks. Much like Pong, it's almost nothing more than a template, one that's already been expanded on a hell of a lot. Just look at games like Arkanoid, or Devilish, or Fire Striker, or various others. And this 3D reimagining expands on Breakout too, just in a very strange way. The main strange thing is that of all the Atari remakes, this one, perhaps based on the simplest game of the lot, involves the most in-depth plot, as all your bat friends have been kidnapped by an evil bat, and you must go out there and travel the world in search of all of them. There's cutscenes, a weird Sims-esque dialect. It's all quite deep, relatively speaking. I suppose this is actually kind of faithful, if you consider that back in the old days somebody actually wrote a story for Super Breakout and released it as a spoken word single. Yeah, that actually happened. Oh, and do you know what else Breakout needs? A tutorial. This game actually comes with a lengthy, multi-part tutorial for Breakout. Honestly, why? Surely the tutorial is pretty simple. Here's a bat, here's a ball. Hit the ball. Do you need anything else? So weird. Anyway, once you strip away all of this, well, it's Breakout. It's in 3D and naturally there's a more slanted camera to take advantage of that, but in the end it is still Breakout, and we've already seen plenty of variations on Breakout that go a fair bit further than this one does, even if it is in 3D. You may be able to change the shape of your bat a little to make slicing the ball easier. There may be the usual power-ups like extenders and multi-balls and all of that, but yeah, it's still Breakout, and even the 3D doesn't make it feel any more advanced than Arkanoid, really. If you like Breakout a hell of a lot and you really think that having an actual story would have seriously improved the original, then go nuts. But while the execution of this game isn't bad or anything, I can't say that I'm really feeling it too much. All that said, I would rather something quite strange and more ambitious like Breakout over something like this next title. Here's Space Invaders. Once again, another game that doesn't need any introduction in the slightest. It is as iconic as gaming gets. Just do the movement of the aliens and everyone knows what you're referring to. Seriously, stand up and do it now. Right there in the office. No one will think you're weird or anything. There's no way that this is going to survive the 3D arcade remake fad without an attempt at bringing it back, and Hasbro did it in 1999. And, well, they've really not done much. This is the least ambitious and ultimately the least appealing of all of these titles, because there's barely anything to it. You still get the same movement from left to right, you get the same ships with much the same movement, and all you really get added on is a couple of desultory power-ups. That's it. And I say you get the same stuff. You get it, but it's all redone in basic 3D dark model low polygon Blandovision with Baby's First Techno mix playing alongside it. There's not exactly a whole lot else to say. It's Space Invaders with the soul stripped out of it, and represents everything negative that could be said about these 3D remakes. A massive cloud of why even bother hands over the whole project, and every other attempt at recreating these Golden Age titles, even the failures like Frogger, has tons more worth than it. There had already been, and there would eventually be, some fantastic takes and re-envisionings of the classic Space Invaders formula. This, however, was decidedly not one of them. Up next, inevitably, we get a take on my favourite arcade game from the Golden Age. Most of the original arcade games we've looked at here are pretty damn good, but my favourite of the lot? It is, of course, Missile Command. There's no other game like it. No other Golden Age arcade game is as intense. No other Golden arcade game is quite as blunt. Missile Command is a game where you put off total annihilation for as long as you possibly can. So evocative, then and now. So vivid it gave its creator nuclear nightmares. It's a special, special game. And, well, here's the Hasbro Atari 3D take on it. I can't say that my hopes were particularly high for this one. Again, there's a plot. Perhaps understandably, this being 1999 and there not being a Cold War anymore, the Russians have now been replaced by aliens who are assaulting the Earth with missiles from outer space. Despite the gravity of the situation, only 3 ships and their missile defence systems have been assigned to prevent the entirety of human civilization from being turned to glass. So you move from place to place and continent to continent, thwarting the aliens' attempts at blowing these now quite futuristic cities to pieces. How does this actually play out? Well, like the original, but a lot worse. Missile Command messes with the classic gameplay in some quite annoying ways. It's not a single screen game anymore for a start. You have to look up and down, left and right to see the missiles come in and intercept them properly. It does so in a way that's quite annoying and screws up with your spatial awareness. It's hard to actually judge how close the damn missiles are. The most annoying change of all, however, is that your 3 ships can only take 1 hit, and if you lose them all, it's game over regardless of how many cities you have left. This change absolutely sucks. Why? Well, one of the best things about Missile Command is doing just enough a lot of the time. It's easy enough to run out of your missiles, or to get one or indeed all of your missile batteries disabled. But often, you do just enough before that happens to keep on going till the next wave. The hand of fate decides not to destroy all of your cities, or to give you 1 bonus city right at the death, and the game continues. Survival continues. The human race continues. This version doesn't have any of that. You just lose the ships and then that's it. And thus the game is quite generic and dull. There is at least a classic version of Missile Command that plays fine enough to be had here, I guess, but that obviously doesn't make this worth bothering with. Stick with the original. There's a reason that game is alongside the Immortals, and this, well, it only exists now to be revived and mocked by twats like me 20 years later. After quite a variable mix of games so far, I've decided to end things on a pretty high note with my two favourites from this little fad, games that are definitely worth anyone's time, in my opinion. For this penultimate one, we go back to Namco, although surprisingly we are still in the realm of Hasbro, for there is one attempt at recreating a classic that, at least for me, they did manage to nail, and it involves another all-time favourite of mine, Galaga. In 2000, Hasbro and Namco came together to provide something that's kind of between a 3D remake and a proper sequel that manages to get it right. Galaga Destination Earth. Once we get past the usual unnecessary plot that basically consists of the Galagas come in again and therefore you have to fight, we get a game that I really quite enjoy, despite its flaws. Destination Earth brings a fair touch of the rail shooters to Galaga. You now have different stages based around various planets and moons, and you have various different camera angles for different sections. You get classic top-down Galaga, you get horizontal Galaga, and you get quite a lot of behind-the-ship Galaga, which, as has been mentioned quite a lot, feels more than a bit like Star Fox, complete with various space artifacts to manoeuvre around and different missions to do, such as rescuing escape pods and the like. In the main though, it's still all about blasting ships apart as they move in various formations, while some quite cool and pumping music plays. As is often the case with these Hasbro games, the presentation hasn't exactly been changed for the better. Yes, it is all a bit dark and very generic PS1, not a patch on the original in any way. But as a game, I find it quite a lot of fun. I do get a bit of a kick out of space shooters like this. It turns out that Galaga as a game simply works very well even when you take it out of the traditional top-down comfort zone. I find that I enjoy the behind-the-ship sections most of all, especially as the weaving and the shooting gets more and more frantic the further you go. It was definitely enough to keep me playing for quite some time, only stopping because, well, there were more games than just this one that I had to cover. Hasbro's attempts at recreating these arcade classics may have been mixed, but this one's definitely a high note. Way, way better than I expected it to be. But in the end, when I go back to my original criteria of being faithful to the original title while adding tons more to the experience, there's one game here that really stands out, and ultimately I would be foolish to not say that it's the best of this bunch. If you want a brilliant reimagining of an arcade classic on the PS1, then look no further than 1996's Robotron X. I said previously that Missile Command was my favourite Golden Age arcade title, and indeed it is. But Robotron 2084 is a close second, an utterly manic and intoxicating arena shooter that's just about flawless in every way. And Robotron X proudly carries on the tradition. Why is this so damn good? Well, it's kind of hard to explain. I mean, it's Robotron. You've got the grid, and you've got tons of enemies to kill while trying to save as many humans as possible. It's not fixed anymore. The camera sways and slants with your movement, which some may find to be kind of annoying, but I think actually kind of adds to the experience. Mainly because this does have quite a psychedelic presentation, with as much flashing colours and general mindfuckery as is possible. When I first played it, I had an inkling that a certain Mr. Jeff Minter might have been involved with this game, and it actually surprised me to learn that he wasn't. Either way, it flies the same freaky flag. The original's excellent gameplay is totally retained. The PS1 is very suited to handling dual-stick controls after all, using the D-pad and the face buttons. It tries to push things as much as possible, certainly not skimping on the amount of robots that it chucks at you, to the point where the frame rate does drop a fair bit at points. Some may find this annoying, others may find the odd bit of slow motion to be helpful, especially when things get particularly crazy on the board. While there may not be too much added to the original Robotron formula compared to other titles here, Everything that is added is totally in service of updating Robotron for the 90s in a way that's completely faithful to the original's chaos. It's bloody great. I suppose it's not surprising considering my personal taste that I would consider this to be the top of the tree, really. Robotron has always been a perfect mix of all the things I love in an arcade game to me, and simply by retaining that mix, this game easily, for me, streaks past all the others. It's the sort of thing that makes you fall in love with gaming all over again. For all the additions and weird changes some of the other games here make, you just can't beat keeping the soul, and that's what Robotron X does. Highly, highly recommended indeed. So, there we are. A thorough examination of a 20-year-old fad as a way of celebrating the 25 years we've spent with an almighty machine. Nowadays it's more common for resurrections of arcade titles to nail that original soul and feel that made them so good. But it's quite interesting to look at these titles. These original arcade games, being so loud, immediate and colourful, were often so at odds with the things that tended to define PS1 gaming that they make for some quite interesting studies. They certainly don't all land, but the ones that do, they're pretty bloody good. Bye for now. Thank you so much for watching this video on some ports to the PlayStation of some classic arcade games. A nice little bit of memories, I'm sure you'll agree. If you like the video, please do like it, do leave some cool comments in the comments section, have a look at my social media and perhaps also have a look at my Patreon. You could join this awesome list of people who I would like to thank here. Alexa Jones Gonzalez, Andrew Dalton, Andy Capt, Asobi Kwan, DX, Brian Henniger, Chris, Cody Spooner, Conrad Pritchard, D. Zalior, Wimron Sutter, Dave Cork, David Rose, Dinty76538, Dustin Cooper, Gary Samaden, Geordie Alex, Glunofeth, Ian Roberts, James Brown, Jason Stevens, Jace Alexander, Jeff Ladd, Lukas Kuligowski, Matthias Gramzov, Martin Pataki, Piotr Margel, Renby Mon, Rusty Kelly, Samir Alamar, Seth Robinson, Simon Gulliver, Stuart Christopher Brownlee, Tariq Amir, The Geeky Dad, Tim Wald, Yerka Operator, Lem and to all the rest of the community, thank you so much and goodbye.